Good morning, everyone. We will call the February 28th, 2022 meeting to order. I am very casual today. Everybody has already mentioned that. Thank you for noticing. I am playing in a golf tournament following this meeting for the Salvation Army, so that is my excuse. Item 2.1.
Receive an update on the strategic planning process.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Mike Lavery in the City Manager's Office. Last February, Council selected the Florida Institute of Government to perform a strategic planning process. The intention was to complete this process prior to the coming election next month. Unfortunately, the process is not complete. If you think of everything that's happened in the past 12 months, there have been a lot of delays that have set back the timeline. So at this point, we are at the completion of phase 1 of the process, and Angela Crest with the Florida Institute of Government is here to give you an update.
Thank you, Mr. Lavery.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So glad I made it. So I apologize. It was an hour and 45 minutes, but I made it. So I come from the other side of Tampa, so I apologize. If you thought you had to switch up the schedule, but I made it, so I'm here. So yes, as you heard Michael mention, there obviously were some challenges along the way. Unfortunately, obviously with the passing of your former city manager, Omicron, and some other things. But I feel like we got to a really great place in terms of data collection, and so that's really what I want to share with you. The process was inclusive of 2 phases. The first phase was really data collection, and then the next phase was really what I like to say, this is where you really hit the ground running and begin to develop those goal statements and objectives. And so with your new city manager on board, I'm sure you'll hear at the end kind of his philosophy and how he would like to move forward. But I just wanted to kind of briefly share with you what we were able to accomplish, and then some of our recommendations for going forward, and happy to answer any questions. So let's see. Is it? So we can, I just want to make sure, okay. So during phase 1, as you can see here, there were 9 different steps, and all of them have been completed except for 1.8, and I'll talk about that when we get to the employee survey in terms of why. And so we worked very closely with communications, conducting communications outreach. I'm going to go through some of the stakeholder interviews and the high-level data that came about. We obviously met with you and conducted a kickoff and setting expectations. I'll talk a little bit. I know you're going to be hearing from Joelle in a minute really in-depthly about the National Citizen Survey, but I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the other data that came about through our resident survey, our community focus group, and then as well as the employee survey, and then this is the report to council. So all of these have been completed. So just really quickly, I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention as we met with key stakeholders, and I think I had the opportunity to speak to all of you as well, included in there. Obviously, some strengths that came out were your natural environment, your location, the diversity of the community engagement. Some of the challenges that we heard over and over, traffic congestion, transportation, some of the lack of commercial development, jobs and workforce development, lack of consensus on the future of Clearwater. In addition to that, now remember this was before your new city manager came on board, but we heard a lot about it's really a great transition, really a great opportunity that hopefully will drive change. Imagine Clearwater was at the very top of the list when it came to looking at opportunities, attracting new businesses, looking at one of the things that we heard over and over again was the inclusiveness of all neighborhoods between downtown and the beaches. How do you connect those? And there's a lot more than just downtown and the beaches. So we heard that over and over again. And then again, threats, things that we really can't control. We all know, economic recession, natural disaster, unplanned growth, those types of things. And so this information we use to drive the next phase of our process. And so when we were looking at doing our resident survey out to your residents, you were also in the middle of doing Clearwater 2045 and the National Citizen Survey. So there was a little bit of survey fatigue. What we ended up doing was working with Joelle and putting some questions with Dr. Stephen Neely from USF into the National Citizen Survey that would really help us with the strategic planning process to get some data. We felt that that was a better method. We did attempt a resident survey. We did not have the feedback that we wanted, but we felt like the information that was in the citizen survey, which you'll hear after me, was really good and clear and statistically sound. And so I'm not really going to go into these because you are going to hear from Joelle. However, I just did want to mention it and say that Dr. Neely did do an analysis of some of the data. And so one of the things, as you can see up here, is that residents, 69% of the residents rate the quality, the overall quality of the natural environment as excellent. As well as 79% in terms of parks and rec, and then paths and walking trails is 78%. So again, I think the other thing that we would just like to draw out here, as you saw in the stakeholder interviews, was in terms of a small majority, but 53% rated civic and community pride as either fair or poor. So again, there's an opportunity there. We just wanted to call that out to you. And so, and there is a full report as well. So we also, we worked with St. Petersburg College Collaborative Labs, and we conducted a community forum session. And so we conducted a SWOT analysis with your community members. And as you can see here, again, going back to what you heard in the citizen survey, as well as what you heard in the stakeholder interviews, again, beaches at the top, traffic congestion, perceptions of the Church of Scientology, and lack of affordable housing are the top 3 weaknesses that came out of that. Again, a lot of consensus, if you will, here on the opportunities, the new city manager, Imagine Clearwater, unifying residents, and then having this developed shared community identity for Clearwater. And so one of the questions we asked was, what top 3 things do you value about the city of Clearwater? And you can see, obviously, the natural environment, the trees, the parks, the trails. The lifestyle was very high. And again, I just want to emphasize the promise of the shared vision. I think that's really important. That keeps coming up over and over. And so a quarter of the people who attended said that they really value that about the city. And so I think one of the things as you move into this next phase, as you begin to look at, things that residents said, hey, we don't want this to change as the city moves into the future. Obviously providing those high quality services, maintaining the green space. But something else that kind of stuck out here was public safety. And so really looking at the police department, that's something that the residents said, hey, we want to make sure that we're continuing to support and fund, that we feel that that's an important part, excuse me, of the community. Okay, so again, we're working with SPC Collaborative Labs. We talked a little bit about kind of the visions for what your residents would be interested in seeing in the next 5 years. And I just want to clarify, remember, this isn't just on planning. This was really overall everything for the city of Clearwater. And so we heard a lot about this kind of holistic approach, work, live, play. Right? And that's really what this first bullet is about, which is about a place where people can live, where they can raise their families, and where businesses can thrive. So we heard that over and over, very, very strong. A lot about the environment. Again, if you go back, you can see the correlation between what they said the strengths were and what the opportunities were, which was on green space, the natural environment, the parks, the trails. And then, again, to me, this is the third, again, correlation. If you look, the diverse neighborhoods, again, embracing that diversity and connecting the neighborhoods downtown, beaches, etc. And so the other thing that we did was we did an activity with them around really those kind of core values or guiding principles, right? Those are those behaviors that are non-negotiable, that as residents, as employees, as leaders of the organization, that you say, hey, this is the way that we want to behave. This is how we want to engage with one another. And so we heard a lot about unity. It was really interesting because don't really see this, but with the members who participated, really felt very strongly about all three of these. So inclusiveness of all people in the community, transparency and integrity, and then innovation. And so there was a lot of discussion on the innovation piece, and from not just the economic side and bringing businesses in, and not just the environmental, which we've heard a lot about, but the one thing that came up that was really interesting was the whole social improvement piece. And so we had a little bit of discussion around that, and I think that was connecting, what we heard was connecting nonprofits, connecting the needs of the community with the resources in the community. So one of the other things that we did, so in our process that we like to do, again, we try to be holistic in looking at all facets of the organization, from the employees to the residents to you as leaders, key stakeholders, including businesses. And so we, with Dr. Stephen Neely and Dr. John Daly, we conducted an employee survey. And so one of the things, I just wanted to share some highlights and just kind of give you an overview. We also did an analysis, and so here are a couple of the items that kind of rose to the top, and I'll explain to you why we haven't done the forum yet, because I know there are some things that are also happening through HR here. So just really quickly, as you can see, overall, employees have a very positive view of the city. 84% agree that it's a great place to work. 89% like their jobs, which is fantastic. And 81% plan to still be working here within 2 years. So as you move forward with your strategic planning and the next steps, that really does help with some consistency. One of the things that we did here, the survey showed really high levels of public service motivation. So 85% of your employees feel like there's meaning in their job, right? That they're contributing to the greater good, and that they feel like they are contributing also to, as individuals, to the mission of the city. So that is a really high number, 92%. And then 78%, which is still extremely high, agree that their values align with the city's values. So there's a great connection there. And then again, this really positive perception of their direct supervisors. A lot of them felt that their immediate supervisors were well trained, really had that on-the-job experience, that they listened to their ideas, and that employees feel praised for a job well done. So all that being said, one of the things that there were some other things that came up, but as we were doing this, the reason why we did not embark on a focus group yet is because at the same time, it is my understanding that you guys will be doing a cultural assessment. And so that cultural assessment really needs to be done first. And then once that is done and you have this information from our survey and you have the cultural assessment, then our recommendation would be that you are able to bring together kind of a core group of employees and kind of go through it at that time. And so I believe that the cultural assessment was approved in December of 2021. So I know that you guys are working on that. So all that being said, we begin to see these kind of high level, what we would call key emerging strategic themes, where we would recommend that you focus. And again, these are drafts. This hasn't been vetted or really any discussion, obviously, with you and or your new city manager. But we did want to provide these to you and just say that these are really our recommendations from our team at USF as you begin to move forward, kind of looking at these. You know, we put economic vitality, I mean, you can call it, you know, growth and development, just economic development. But the reason why we chose the vitality was we heard a lot through all of the data about the economic health of the city of Clearwater. And so it's that sustainability piece, not just economic development, right? It's not just Imagine Clearwater, but it's all the support services that go along with providing businesses with what they need, as well as residents with what they need to thrive. Infrastructure, quality of life. And then I just wanted to mention that we also felt that, again, you can change the name to whatever you want, but we really liked the term connected community, our team did, because we felt that that really encompassed the whole diversity inclusion piece that we heard a lot about, as well as communications in terms of kind of this two-way feedback between residents and leadership. And then obviously operational excellence. So those are what have emerged through all the data for us. And so as we close out phase one of this, and you kind of move into that next step with your city manager, we just wanted to throw out a couple of items that we really think, you know, we weren't able to get to this, but we think it's important as you move forward. And you'll see the next two slides are divided really with kind of some strategic items that you should consider and some operational items. And so strategically, really need to look at Clearwater 2045. There's always this confusion between a strategic plan and a comprehensive plan. And they're two different things. The comprehensive plan should be a part of the strategic plan, not all of it, but there should be some goals and objectives about making sure that that comprehensive plan is followed and is part of it. So I think there really needs to be some synergy between the two. One of the other things that we also, you know, to consider as you move forward, I know you guys are going to be going through an election, and there will probably need to be some orientation for your newly elected officials around this process, you know, especially data, at least allowing them to understand all of the data that has been collected. And then one of the other things that our team discussed was, you know, and this is just an example, but I think one of the, like, Imagine Clearwater is a great brand identity. When you say it, people get it. And so if you're truly going to do strategic planning as you move forward, you do need some type of brand identity that when you say it, that there's buy-in, right? That the train is moving and that everyone is on it. Citizens, businesses, you as leaders, your employees. And then there's just a couple of operational things. I won't go too much in depth on those, but again, I already mentioned the cultural assessment through HR. Really need to discuss the city manager and you as leaders with council in terms of kind of what your project timeline is. And then one of the key things to also consider is what the implementation action plan is. And so that's really more of an operational, but that's really the people, the tools, the resources, and how you're going to really hold each other accountable. And then lastly, again, some strategic things moving forward. I already talked about some of these, as well as some operational. So, you know, there needs to be some discussions, the whole dashboard, scorecard tool for reporting and accountability, some type of community report that goes out that lists your goals and objectives, again, that everybody can agree on. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I'm sure, as I mentioned, you know, we really enjoyed working with you, even though there was a lot of hiccups along the way, but we appreciated it, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I know you're going to hear from Mr. Jennings, I believe, on, you know, his philosophy and kind of the next steps in his mind, so, yes.
I'll take care of that, thanks.
Okay.
Mr. Jennings, do you have anything to add at this time?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank Angela and
Yeah.
her entire team for what I think has been a very good process of gathering the kind of data that we will need in order to be able to move forward to finalize a strategic plan. So Angela, please convey
Yes.
our appreciation to your entire team.
Thank you.
The next step, because we have an election coming up, is what I would like to recommend to the city council is to have a facilitated goal-setting process, which we can really kind of dive deep into some of the information that Angela and her team have provided. And then that, of course, once we have defined set of goals, that leads to the strategic plan. I would recommend we do that fairly quickly after the election, say early April. And then I think we can wrap up this entire process shortly thereafter.
Councilmember Albrecht.
Okay, so my questions deal with the respondents. Because I just want to make sure we have an even, view of really what we need to do with the city. I love collaborative labs. I've been through that several times on different boards, and they do a good job. How many people took part in that?
I have to go back and look at the data. I want to say we had around 40 in the community forum one. Around 40.
40 in each, I mean, you had just one forum, or?
We had one forum, yes.
Okay. So you're basing a lot of this on 40 people?
No, because we did, that's what I was trying to explain to you. We did these stakeholder interviews, and there was over like 25 of those done. Then from there, we took that information to try to do the resident survey. So we used some of the data as well from the NCS survey, which is statistically sound, plus the employee survey, which we had over, I want to say 700 responses to the employee survey, and then we did the community forum. So I'm just sharing with you the data in terms of, and those are the numbers for the process along the way.
So that was my second question, is how many out of the 1,800 employees responded back? You said 700. So
It was a little bit over 700. We had 650 approximately that were online, and then Dr. Neely inputted a little bit over 100 more, so probably closer to 800. It's somewhere between probably 750 to 800. I have to look at the data, but it's around that. So
okay.
it's no higher than 800 of the employees that completed it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Mayor.
Well, and I guess my question is, and your team has done these for multiple cities, obviously. How many of the ones that you've done previously involved a city that you would relate to Clearwater in that we are bound, our boundary, we are developed out to our boundaries in all directions? I know it's affordable housing is always going to be something people are screaming for and want, and we would love to develop, we would love to be able to provide that. But how do you present it to the people when you say the only way to do affordable housing is, and we've got 3 new projects on the board. We've got one renovation of the Greenwood apartments we approved a month and a half ago. We're addressing it to the extent we're capable of. We can't, the city, what people don't understand is the city cannot buy a piece of property for more than its appraised value. So we have to find sellers who are willing to sell it for what it's appraised for, number one. We also need to be able to assemble a large tract to be able to do a significant number of affordable housing, which is a formula that is almost unattainable in today's economy. So how do you get that message? How would you recommend we get that message out? Because, when you try to assemble individual parcels to make a big assemblage, the more you acquire, the higher the price goes on the remaining parcels, and appraised value goes out the window, and we can't buy it. So, and I know we had a forum at our CRA last week, And I was told that at one of the tables, they were talking about affordable housing, and they were like, well, the only way to build affordable housing is going to be to go vertical. And they're like, what do you mean? And we're going to have to go more than a single story, more than 2 or 3. It's going to have to go multiple stories. And they're like, oh gosh, no, not in my backyard. So it's a very difficult, it's very easy to say we need affordable housing, but it's a very difficult animal to contain. How have you guys addressed that before?
Right, so I'll answer your first question, which was in regards to similar cities. So we're actually just finishing up with the city of Cape Coral, their strategic plan. And so one of the interesting things about them is that they're pre-platted communities, so they don't have any more land, right? And so they do not have the infrastructure to build. And so one of the things that we did in their strategic plan was, a lot of it was an education of the residents. Because what you're saying, it's easy to say it, but if they don't understand it, and as we begin to move through, especially with them, there was this clear distinction between affordable housing and attainable housing. And so it's really being able to educate the public on those two different things and what the city is, what resources you have to do what you need to do and what you can't do. And so those are some of the strategic goals that we actually put into their plan, was an education component, but also allowing residents to, they're also doing a survey around the needs. So I know that's like survey fatigue, but it was specific to looking at their different areas within the community and different sections of the community. So that's how we did it. They haven't done it. They're finishing up their strategic plan, but it is a goal within their strategic plan, yes.
Councilmember Beckman.
Thank you, Angela.
Yeah.
That was a good presentation. If we're going to look at this data as we move forward, I had a couple questions similar to Councilmember Albritton. So if we had 40 in the Collaborative Labs Community Forum, did that include Zoom people?
Yes, it was virtual.
It was all virtual?
It was all virtual.
Okay. Is that recorded? So
It is.
okay, so we can have access to that?
Absolutely.
And a list of who participated?
Absolutely.
Okay,
A real-time record has been sent, but yeah.
okay. And
I
then,
will double check and make sure they have the video.
okay, great. And then the stakeholder interviews, we can know who the interviewees were?
Who, absolutely,
Who was
yes.
interviewed?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And then I had an, no, you covered a whole lot, but, yeah, I mean, yeah, the National Citizen Survey is the one that we're gonna do next on the.
Yes.
Okay, and do you know, did you add about 10 questions? Do you have any idea about how many?
I'll
Because
have
that
to-
was a lot, that was like
Yeah,
200
I wanna say
questions.
5, Jill. I think it was around 5.
5 questions?
So it was mainly looking at a SWOT. There were SWOT questions. I think it was 4 or 5 that we added.
Okay. Okay.
Joel, do you have something to add?
Thank you.
We asked what characteristics they
Yes.
would like to focus on in the next 2 years. That was the big one.
Characteristics to focus on in the next 5 years or so?
2 years.
2 years, okay.
And economic health, she's going to present it, but economic health was the #1 with 92%. That's why we put economic vitality as a key emerging strategic need.
Okay,
Not just because of that, but obviously.
okay. I think that's all I have right now, thanks.
Councilmember Bunker, anything?
Yes, as far as affordable housing goes and attainable housing, we can't just say, well, it's too hard, because it is too hard for every city. But we've got to do everything we can to help folks in this unfortunate climate. I mean, I'm stunned by rent prices here in Clearwater. The first thing you list as top weaknesses is presence and perception of the Church of Scientology. Do you have any suggestions as to how to tackle that?
Boy, if I did, I think I'd be really rich. No, I have no idea. I mean, honestly, I think that is just open communication, two-way communication, and you guys working towards it as a goal or an objective within the strategic plan. I mean, I think it's been a long history here, but I wish I did. I wish I had a crystal ball and could help you on that, but it definitely came up over and over again.
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear that it was the perception of. So I want to like put that on record. It wasn't the Church of Scientology. It was the perception of the Church of Scientology and the challenges related to that.
Well, that perception is born out of, 50 plus years of Scientology's actions. But when we're dealing with the perception, I don't think we can coddle them. I don't think we can try to improve people's perceptions of the Church of Scientology. I think we need to be honest about them. And the people of Clearwater who are upset with Scientology right now, I think would view favorably our leadership kind of behaving like the leader of Ukraine right now, saying, we're going to fight back. So I think that's going to be important for us to go forward. We have to acknowledge the fact that, yes, they're fixing up 3 buildings, but that it's clear now that Miscavige can wave his hand and get parishioners to put something in their building. So he needs to wave the other hand and do the same thing with all of the other buildings here in Pronto. That will change the perception of Scientology.
I have one last question.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Under your key emerging strategic themes,
Yes.
there are a number of them, and they're not in alphabetical order, but
No.
I don't think, they're not, it's random, or are they prioritized?
No, it's
Okay.
totally random.
All right, just wanted to make sure of that. Thank you.
Completely random.
Well, I just want to remind people, on affordable housing, we're trying to use every tool in our toolbox, and we're not going to stop. Unfortunately, having gone through these cycles here in Florida, they have a tendency of resolving themselves. I hope we don't have another 08-09, which is how it resolved itself last time. But, you're going to start to see interest rates go up. That tends to reduce people moving around and, buying homes because mortgage rates are going to go up. It's also going to add to cap rates, which are going to be more difficult for affordable housing. That's just an editorial comment. Take this in the spirit it's meant.
Mm-hmm.
I am not fully satisfied with this process,
Sure.
especially having gone through it previously with the city. I feel as though we still need to take another trip around the city and have some in-person meetings. Because I don't know that I think the national survey that was done gets at some things, but the process is not only for us to get information from citizens, but it is this past week. And I would like to go around to the rec centers and litmus test some of these findings and also talk about, some of our goals and also get a better idea of what some of the goals from our citizens are. And I think if we do that after the election, it will be a very good entree for the new council members or whatever the outcome will be. I just don't think we should rush this, and I don't think enough has been done on the community side. We really had robust discussions last time we did this and made certain that people understood what the city was doing, what was in our purview and our abilities, and what is not. And so I just don't think this is a complete project yet. I really don't.
Yeah.
And if we have to pay a little bit more for some facilitation, then so be it. But I'm just not comfortable signing off on this yet.
If I could comment. Yeah, I completely agree with you, 100%. When we started this process, we had made some recommendations at the very beginning about doing community forums in different sections of the community, actually going into the community centers and picking locations in the different geographic areas, because we heard of the inclusivity and the diversity, and we were not able to do that. And so, and maybe we weren't the right people to do it, but we weren't able to do it. There were too many extenuating factors as it related to transitions happening within the city. And so I would just say that I agree with you. I think you need more citizen input. I think you need to go into the community and gather more data before you begin to put the pen to paper for goals and objectives. If you truly want to make it a robust plan that has gotten input, I think the data we've collected so far is good. However, I do not believe that you have really gone to the downtown community. I don't believe that you've gone to some of the other kind of neighborhoods that call themselves neighborhoods. So I agree with you. We did recommend it, but we were not able to do it. So.
Well, I mean, the purpose of this was not just to check a box.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
The strategic plan should create pillars around where we're going to spend
Yes.
our time and our money. And I just don't think this is, I don't like using this term, but it's not soup yet.
No, and by no means is it. It takes, yes, I would agree. And again, I just think there were extenuating circumstances with changes in leadership and other things that occurred throughout the process. I think you're off to a good start, but definitely not complete. So.
I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but that's my perspective.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about some next steps and how we could flush this out a little bit further. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
3.1.
Accept the results of the 2021 National Community Survey.
Mayor, Council, Joelle Castelli, Public Communications Director. We wanted to present this item, the Citizen Satisfaction Survey, the same day, since they did dovetail together so nicely, and we asked questions in the Citizen Survey that came right from the Strategic Plan Survey, so that we had scientific data to add to what Angela was presenting. I'm here to present the results of the 2021 National Community Survey. The survey measures the livability of Clearwater, which means not only is it habitable, but is it also a desirable place to live. Not only where people live, but where they want to live. Communities are partnerships. They include government, private sector, community-based organizations, and residents. This survey captures residents' opinions on 10 facets of the community: economy, mobility, community design, utilities, safety, natural environment, parks and rec, health and wellness, education, arts, culture, and inclusivity and engagement. Residents were surveyed from July to September of 2021. 5,000 randomly selected homes received the mailing, and 531 surveys were returned. The margin of error is 4%, and the response rate was 12%. Survey results were weighted so that the demographic profile of the respondents was representative of the demographic profile of adults in Clearwater. The survey was available to be filled out via paper, online, and a Spanish version was also available.
Did any council members get one?
No.
Okay. Just want to know.
The level of confidence is 95% confidence with a plus or minus 6% margin of error. And this is a benchmark and a comparison survey. So one of the benefits of this tool is that it compares us to other cities our size. And I like to say that, with code enforcement being a regulatory agency, It's naturally going to rate lower than our public safety divisions, but when we compare it to what other code enforcement departments are in other cities, then it's a more valuable number. When Clearwater's rating is within 10 points of the benchmark city, it's considered similar, and when it is more than 10 points away, it's either higher or lower than the benchmark. When the difference is more than 20 points, then it is much higher or much lower. It's important to note that our survey was conducted in 2021. Many of the benchmark communities conducted their surveys prior to the pandemic, so we need to keep that in mind when comparing with the benchmarks. We've also conducted this survey in 2008, 14, 17, 2019, and 2021, so we can compare trend over time data. It's important to review improvements or declines in any of the facets, and that would be defined as 6% difference between any of the data. So let's talk about how the data was analyzed. The demographics of the survey respondents were compared to those in the 2010 census and the 2017 American Community Survey estimates for adults in the city of Clearwater. And the primary objective of weighing the survey data is to make sure that the survey respondents reflect the larger population. So an example of that is we had less of the 25-year-olds and more of the 65-year-olds that actually took the survey, so the results have to be weighted in order to mirror our community. So now let's go over some of the highlights of the data. About 8 in 10 respondents positively rated the city as a place to live and the overall quality of life in the community. Similarly, 80% of the residents indicated they were either very likely or somewhat likely to recommend living in Clearwater to others and plan to remain in the city for the next 5 years. Of all the items were on par with the national and custom benchmarks, and they scored similar marks to our 2019 survey. City residents appreciate their local government. When asked questions about Clearwater's government and its performance, about half of the residents gave us positive marks. Most survey items relating to governance increased from the 2019 survey scores, and all were on par with benchmark communities. One thing to keep in mind was this was done between July and September of 2020, so there had been organizations that hadn't been physically in their offices for a year and a half, 2 years. And one constant that the residents saw was their government workers were continuously working. They were in the buildings. They were still picking up their trash. For the overall quality of city services, customer service received by city employees performed best among the residents with 7 in 10 ratings, both as excellent or good. And other items, including the value of services for taxes paid, the overall city direction, the job the government does at welcoming resident involvement, being honest, treating all residents fairly, and treating all residents with respect, received positive ratings from at least half of the residents. Strong communication preferences were asked. So we asked people, how do you want to receive information and how do you most receive it? Residents were asked what source they used to stay informed about the city and its events. Nearly 2/3 reported using local TV news. Over half said the same for the city's website. And local newspaper was the next most popular with 45%. Nextdoor and city newsletters were used by about 1/3 of residents, and less than 1/4 of the respondents said that they used city's Facebook and My Clearwater magazine. We then asked them, how would you like to receive your communications? And 26% said text alerts, 24% said email, and 20% said direct mail. And it's interesting to note that direct mail, because that, out of all those, is the most expensive. Mobility is an area that we continuously see need for improvement. Moving forward, it's an area of opportunity. At least half of the respondents positively rated the city's traffic enforcement. You could also say half did not positively rate the mobility and transportation. Street cleaning, street lighting, sidewalk maintenance, and bus and transit was also about half. A majority gave excellent or good marks to the ease of travel by car, bicycle, or walking. These ratings were on par with custom and national benchmarks as well as the 2019 survey. Residents feel safe in the Clearwater community and gave positive reviews to public safety. 70% of the community, members rated the overall feeling of safety in the city as excellent or good. The majority of residents reported feeling either very or somewhat safe in their neighborhood during the day and in Clearwater's downtown commercial area during the day. At least 3/4 of the residents felt safe from both property crime and violent crime, and about 7 in 10 said the same for natural disasters. All items were on par with the national benchmark. 80% gave favorable ratings to ambulance and emergency medical services. 70% favorably rated police services, crime prevention, animal control, and fire prevention, and those were also similar to benchmarks. And since this is a national survey, we ask about those things because that's all part of the community, even though we are not necessarily the service provider for some of those items. Now we're going to talk about the facets of livability. The facets of livability are our residents' perceptions of quality and the importance of each of the facets of the community livability. They provide an overview of community strengths and challenges. All 10 community facets were rated similar to the national benchmark. This slide shows community characteristics and how they were related to livability as a whole. So 64% overall economic health, 48% overall quality of the transportation system, 58% overall design or layout of residential or commercial areas, 65% overall quality of the utility infrastructure, and 69% overall feeling of safety. Characteristics as a whole as they relate to Clearwater as a whole. 71% said natural environment, 80% overall quality of parks and recreation opportunities, 75% positive overall health and wellness opportunities, 58% overall opportunities for education, cultural, and the arts, and 42% residents' connection and engagement with their community. Then, as we talked about with the previous item, we asked residents, what do you see as the top priorities for the next 2 years? And shown on these next 2 slides are what the community characteristics residents said the city should focus on. All results were similar to national benchmarks in the cities who also asked a similar question. 92% said the overall economic health. It's important to note that this was a prompted question, so we said, here's a list of items, tell us how important you think the following are. So it wasn't a fill in the blank, what do you think is important? 82% overall quality of the transportation system, 80% overall design or layout of residential and commercial areas, 90% overall quality of the utility infrastructure, and 91% overall feeling of safety. 89% said overall quality of natural environment, 87% said the quality of the parks and recreation opportunities, wellness and health opportunities was 83%, education, culture, and the arts, and the residents' connection and engagement with the community both rated lower. So what does this all mean? Every community, including ours, must balance performance and importance. And we must limit resources. We must balance limited resources while meeting residents' needs and striving to maintain a high level of community livability. It's helpful to know what facets are most important to our residents and what facets are perceived as higher or lower quality by our residents. When a facet is rated high important but is rated lower quality, then it should be a priority to address. So the quadrants on this chart show which facets were given higher or lower importance ratings up and down, and which had higher or lower quality ratings from right to left. And that is the last.
So the most important is to be up in the northeast quadrant, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Questions? Councilmember Albritton?
Okay, so here we go with the percentages, and, I keep going back to the respondents again, and I know, we got, city sent out 5,000 surveys, you got back 500. I guess 4,500 were 500 didn't get to who they were sent to, So out of the 4,500, you got 500 respondents. What is the respondent ratio on the national survey? Because I'm coming up with all this bad data you're basing the Clearwater on is based on 0.4% of our Clearwater population.
Well, they don't send out like a national survey. They compare us to other cities that send out similar surveys. So they're going to try to get a 95% confidence rate in each of those communities. So I can't tell you what each, like if I had to look
I
up
understand that.
Idaho, I'd have to
I'm
look
just
up
making a
theirs.
comment, basically. I'm not saying I'm rejecting this, but we're going, I mean, you were very detailed on everything that, based on 0.4% of our respondents in Clearwater. I mean, if you had more respondents, it may be a whole different thing, so.
Well, but from a statistical perspective, when you get a sample size of that size, you should get a representative set of results
Yeah,
with a margin of error of 6%. Now, if you got, 2,000 respondents, that margin of error starts to shrink. It's a lot more expensive, obviously. A lot of people got the survey and just decided they didn't want to take the time to send it back to you.
oh, I know that, and I understand polls and surveys. And it all depends how you gather your data, whether you're gonna trust it or not. I mean, I'm trusting you're telling me that you have a 95%, so I'll go with that. I just wanted to bring that up.
Councilmember Beckman.
So I echo that concern. I have a couple of starting out questions. Number one, how much did we pay for this survey? Do you have an idea,
About 30,000.
30,000? Okay.
I'll get you the exact amount.
I mean, it's okay. And then, do we use the same firm or contractor, this National Research Center at Holco, for each of those years? We've used it
Yes.
consistently?
Yes.
Okay. Are we required to do this for some?
No, but the savings was about 30,000 when we looked at using a different firm back in probably 2014. And to compare our previous survey results to, like, let's say we did a 2023 survey, the price was just astronomical because they didn't have all the data. They didn't have all the raw data.
Okay. But I meant more, are we required to do a survey, a full citizen survey?
No.
That's just our choice, right?
We've been doing it because we thought it was important to start collecting data
Yeah.
and also to have benchmarks and so we could look at what our trends are
Right.
back when we originally did it in '08.
And so that's the next question is, do we think it's valuable? And I do question some of the responses. And, I'm not an expert on polling, but certainly the number of questions was troubling to me. I think it's like over 200 minute little questions. The number of respondents is troubling to me. And then I wanted to understand.
Troubling in what way?
I don't think we got enough. I don't think we got enough. And number two is I have a question about what does it mean that if we have categories that are weighted, so we didn't get enough young people to respond, we didn't get enough minorities to respond, whatever that means. Does that mean if we had 4 people that were under 25 that responded, those guys get weighted, and those 4 20-year-olds carry a whole lot more weight? They're representing that demographic out of 4 people that may have responded in that category. Is that how that works?
Roughly, yes.
Yeah?
I don't know that number was.
Or whatever
high.
number, whatever the number is. But I mean, I find that troubling too, that 4 random 20-year-olds who completed the survey are speaking now weighted more for whatever percentage of, people under 25 or however they're grouped. So, and then, yeah, I mean, I think, and it's interesting that I look at some of the slides and the responses and the satisfaction rate with our city services and our police and fire. I mean, that That, I think, aligns with what I hear when I knock on door, when I spent months and months knocking on doors and having front door conversations, and I continue to be out there, multiple times a week, not every day. And that's part of the feedback I get. But, some of the responses about traffic and bike lanes and that, at 50% of the people are okay with all that. I mean, some of that stuff, it's like, that's not what I'm hearing. I can take a pause here and go through mine. But I think, as we use this data, we use Angela's data that she brought forward. I mean, if we're going to be looking at this stuff, I want to feel real confident in it. And I agree with you, we need to get out in the communities and really hear more from people and invite them to join in and have candid, more relaxed conversations. But yeah, I mean, I wanted, what demographics were they required to enter so that we could, categorize who answered?
It's mainly on page 83 of the crosstabs of the actual results.
And so if we've been doing this for a number of years, another question is, how have we used it in the past to change our behavior? And have we seen, what do we use our survey results for in the past?
So this year, we asked a question, have you contacted a city representative? And if so, was your issue resolved? And were you satisfied with the employees? So that's something that we'll work with the city manager to go over that data and see if we need to, if we use that, for example, to do some customer service training in an area, if we can see where their issues were, where there were problems like that. We know we've seen sidewalks and transportation as an issue, and Mr. Jennings has already addressed sidewalks and started that repair process, so.
But like in 2008 or 12 or 15, how did we use that data? What behavior changes did the city make in response to this survey that they sent out previous years?
I would have to go back and look at that. I don't know off the top of my head.
They were areas of improvement. I mean, there were areas that we knew we were strong, and we wanted to make certain that we kept them strong. Parks and Recreation, solid waste was always an area that we were really strong. And then there were other areas that we weren't as good in. And one of the things that I find interesting in this, when you go into the actual survey and the results, which is where the meat of everything is.
I went through all 83 pages.
I'm sure you did.
Yep.
Not questioning that.
Okay.
What I'm telling you is that's where there is better data, and you can see trends, be them good or bad. And then you have to figure out, which is one of my main issues, is it perception or is it reality? And if it's perception, like if you compare our Parks and Recreation and our libraries to the municipalities that surround us, there is no comparison. None. So if everybody says, well, which now that I've announced I'm not running again, I'm going to really be outspoken, so get ready, folks. It's going to be a wild ride the next 2 years. When people say we don't care about neighborhoods, but we have the best libraries, the best parks and recreation, very safe communities. We have, an incredible fire department and how they react to any emergency. The question then is, are we communicating what we have in our neighborhoods? Now, I know people are upset about sidewalks, and that will get resolved over time, but are we communicating what we're actually giving people as a service in comparison to what they would get if they lived somewhere else? We have more square footage of libraries and parks and rec and everything else. And that, I think, is what I'm trying to get a hold of, is how do we communicate with people better so that they know the services and they can avail themselves of those services. I think that's our main challenge. But we always looked at trends to find out if there's an area that we're starting to show weakness, and if we are, why? Is it actually delivery of services, or is it perception? Either one of them is a problem. You just have to figure out how you're going to deal with it. But I mean, these are, if anyone ever took statistics on any level, these are statistically good results from the sample sizes that we are using. The only thing you can do is reduce the standard deviation by having a lot more inputs. Councilmember Beckman.
Okay, so part of my questions, previous, like how much did we pay for it, what do we use it for, what have we used it for, is do we get value out of it, and what actions are we taking? So to see trends, that's all good, and it's not very expensive, but the other question is, what is a good result? So if I'm looking at page, and like you said, you read through the meat of it, so and I don't know that this has a page, oh it is, it's page 11. Please rate the following categories of Clearwater government performance. And we've got, percentage of excellent or good. And we're all at, 54%, 58, 53, 45, 49, 53. So it hovers around a 50th percent. Is that good? Is that what we want? Or do we want 80% of our residents to feel that we are excellent or good? And so that seems to be, this trend. It went up slightly in some places, but is that acceptable?
Well, I think that goes back to the strategic plan. What are the standards that we want to achieve?
Right.
And what are the costs of achieving those standards?
And it might be part of communication, like you said, and people don't really realize all the things that are going on. And so it might be, communicating all the good that we are doing, and we can bump it up that way, or it might be actually delivering more to bump it up. One of the slides you had, Joelle, I had a question about, it was like, it was on appreciate local government. If we have 50% positive marks for that first bullet, but then you have 70% excellent or good, it was 50% positive marks that increased from 2019, so it's a subheading there, is that right? And then excellent or good on overall city services and things like that, but.
Find where you are.
It's like slide 14 of 34. But I think the bigger question is, what is it that what target percentage are we looking for? Because I would hope we have at least 80% positives in the respondents. But sometimes people who are crabby about stuff are the ones who choose to fill out a survey. Yeah, I've got something to say, and they fill it out and they're not happy. But I just think in looking at that survey and how tedious it was, it's like, man, I wonder what kind of person is going to sit down and fill out this survey. I don't think it's the average person who's working and raising 3 kids and commuting and, I don't know.
In response to that,
Yeah,
I would
that
say
slide?
that, that slide, the 70%, those bullets should be under that 70%.
Okay,
Like
okay.
you said, it's
For
a
those
header and those are bullets
Okay.
underneath it. One reason why we do the survey is to get the scientific data from the people who aren't necessarily attending the neighborhood meetings or the community events. Sometimes we'll have 25 people, 10 people that show up at those events, and I would tell you that that is not a representative sample
Right.
of our community and the
I agree.
input. So the people who are at home and, they have the PTA meeting or they have the soccer game tonight, they can take this at their convenience, and they had probably 3 weeks to take it. So you're going to get more responses and a more representative sample other than the people that you continuously hear from at the same meetings.
Not the frequent flyers.
Although the frequent flyers could have been mailed the survey out of 5,000.
Absolutely.
I mean,
But if you have, again, a large enough sample size, they're going to get smoothed out of the process or not dominated. Vice Mayor?
I mean, we got 12% response. That's pretty good. I mean, normally it's single digits. I mean, for most of these things, and you're exactly right, though, Kathleen, about a lot of people fill this out. It's very much like Yelp. As a restaurant owner, I can tell you, people don't go on Yelp to say, "Wow, what a great experience I had." Yelp is 95% people who didn't have a good experience. But yet they represent less than 1% of my customer base, and yet they're 95% of the people on Yelp. So that's kind of how it works. But is this perfect? No, but it definitely gives us a roadmap to work from, and I think it's been doing it every 2 years. I think it's a valuable tool to stay on top of the information. And I won't be here to see the next one.
Councilmember Bunker?
Having spent years in radio and TV, we dealt with Nielsen ratings, and it's amazingly small how the number of people who are involved in any survey. But statistically, they're usually accurate. But you look at the results, and I'd look at the Nielsen's and go, I don't watch any of those shows in the top 20 or top 50. But people do. I think, the results we've got were probably solid, not surprising, but I think we need to not just go by those numbers, but say, well, what is really important for the city? As we continue to talk with people in the community, we need to address the things that will make the city better. And we can see what those things are.
It's something else?
Yeah, can we have information about the demographic responses, like how many people answered that were 18 to 24 years old versus 65 to 74 years old?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Well, I think, looking at the areas that we were way under or way above the national trend, I think all of these are important. I think this is a good tool. I think you have to use the data that you get. But I would highly recommend that we continue to do this as a city. Mr. Jennings, do you have anything to add in how you, as the daily administrator, will use some of these numbers?
No, I would share the opinion that this is highly valuable going forward. I mean, to be able to look back on data, it's one of the things that we've been talking about on the innovation side. I think it was smart for the city to begin this process some years ago in order to be able to take a look at the data over time, because that does help with trends. It certainly helps with if we're falling below what the expectations are, or certainly surpassing what the expectations are. So for me, this is a very good roadmap on the operational side. I do want to kind of dig a little deeper into some of the particular areas on the operational side, so we can kind of get to the heart of some of the issues, if you will, which is I know we are going to be doing anyway. So I find this a very useful tool.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Costelli. 4.1.
Approve changes to the Penny for Pinellas 4 project list.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, Kayleen Castle, Budget Officer. At the last work session, you were presented a conceptual plan for the relocation and construction of a new city hall next to the Municipal Services Building. Current construction costs, as well as the increased facility size, result in the need to allocate additional funding so staff can begin the formal planning and design process. The item before you is to approve revisions to the Penny for Pinellas project list to reallocate funding for the City Hall replacement project. By ordinance, we are required to hold a public hearing at any time which there is a change in Penny for Pinellas project funding greater than $500,000. These changes proposed meet this criterion. The City Hall project is currently funded with $6,650,300 in Penny for Pinellas revenues. An increase of $16 million is proposed, reallocating funding from the Utilities Infrastructure Project to bring the total Penny for Pinellas funding to $22,650,300 for City Hall replacement. The Utilities Infrastructure Project is proposed to be eliminated, and the $16 million plan to be funded in fiscal year 2021-22 through 28-29 will be reallocated to the City Hall project. To provide additional information in response to your questions and comments at the last work session, Mike is going to discuss more of the conceptual plan, and then Jay will be speaking to the impact of this funding change on the Utilities Fund.
Thank you, Kayleen. We met with all the council members over the last couple of weeks to talk about some of the questions you had previously. I'll just go over briefly some of those items related to the size and the cost. And as Kayleen said, Jay will talk a little bit about the funding piece. On the size, our focus really was sort of twofold. One was to relieve space issues in the MSB. We do have a fairly crowded municipal services building currently. And the other was to provide adequate space in City Hall for the remaining services, and really to try to achieve as many efficiencies as we can as we do that. We used, to get to the space level that we got to, we used some assumptions for the workspace, for the common space, for the circulation areas, based on a study done back in 2009. So some of those things may change as we get into the discussions with a design professional, but we used that information and then we updated it with other variables such as the size of departments, some changes in function of departments, to make sure that they were accurately or appropriately sized. Again, we'll plug that information in and provide that to the design professionals when we get to that stage. As it relates to cost, we have a very similar square footage and footprint size as Dunedin City Hall. So we utilized them as sort of the main model for our costing. They had a construction bid approved last April, so it's a fairly recent bid, and their overall project cost put them at about $619 a square foot. So basically we took our square footage, multiplied it by that $619, came up with right around $25 million in cost. We also, that's based on if we had done the project in April of 2021, mind you. We also added in a couple escalators, one for escalation over time, and then also for some unknowns related to construction and supply chain issues. So those were 10% each, so a total of 20% buffer to create a budget of $30 million at this point. Our intent is to try to refine that as we move forward with the design professional and with other professionals, and that's what we intend to do. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jay to talk a little bit about the funding piece.
Thank you, Micah. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jay Ravens, Finance Director. To wrap up this presentation, we wanted to provide some information related to both the proposed financing for the City Hall project, including both this $16 million requested transfer of Penny for Pinellas funding from the Utilities Infrastructure Project to the City Hall project, and also the use of $7.35 million in general fund reserves as proposed. The Penny Utilities Infrastructure funding of $2 million per year for fiscal years 2022 through 2029, for a total of $16 million, was intended to provide additional funding for water and sewer utility capital projects. Currently, the Water and Sewer Utility Fund has approximately $120 million in cash reserves available for capital project funding due to capital project spending in recent years that was less than forecasted, and is currently not in need of this subsidy from Penny infrastructure sales tax monies. We will continue to complete annual rate studies for the utility fund with the goal of maintaining the utility fund as an independent, self-sustaining enterprise fund. With regard to the use of general fund reserves, you'll recall that our fiscal third quarter budget amendments adopted in October indicated a budgeted $9.9 million general fund surplus for fiscal 2021, primarily due to strong fiscal 2021 revenues versus very conservative budget estimates that were made at the height of COVID. Per currently unaudited fiscal 2021 financial statements, we expect to realize an additional $9 million of surplus, primarily due to expenditure budget savings across all departments, for a total of approximately $19 million of general fund surplus for fiscal 2021. Due to this significant addition to general fund reserves, we are currently able to fund the $7.35 million needed for the City Hall project and still have a healthy level of general fund reserves in excess of our policy requirements. Happy to answer any questions.
Vice Mayor?
Jay, for the public's knowledge, what is our base reserve requirement and what is it now? I mean, just to say we are well above.
Sure.
Let's tell them how well above we are.
Our base reserve requirement is approximately $14 million. After this $7.35 million, we'd have $42.6 million remaining versus we have $56 million remaining after deducting the $14 million of required reserves per policy. We have an excess of $42 million over and above our minimum requirement.
We basically have almost three times or a little over three times.
That minimum level, yes.
Reserve minimum is required.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I mean, I understand some of the efficiencies. I still wish we had looked at an architect for this property. And, you know, I'm going to move forward with this as Mr. Jennings and I have talked about. But, you know, just because we have money doesn't always mean we have to spend money. And I think there could be ways that we could, you know, solve our city hall issues in different manners. I am also hearing from some people that they'd love to see a millage decrease. So that's something that's out there. We were very fortunate to weather COVID as well as we did. I know that everybody was very cautious, as we should have been, with experiences back in 08 and 09, which were, you cannot compare COVID to that time frame. It was very, very difficult, and much more difficult on our citizens back then. So I'll leave it at that. But fortunately, we are in very good financial shape. We've always been fiscally reasonable in the things that we've done in this city. That's one of the reasons our bond rating went up in 09. That was a very rare animal throughout this country. So, other questions? Councilmember Beckman?
You said you wish we looked at an architect for this property?
I wish that we had at least looked at the library and had an honest-God architect look at ways that it could have been turned into half library, half city hall. And this goes back a long ways, but as most of you know, this library was built well beyond what the consultants recommended within the context of our population within the city, to the tune of about 24,000 square feet. And since 2000, I still believe libraries have changed. With the onset of the internet, a lot of people do research at home. It means that you don't need to have as many volumes as you used to have. So this is not going to be an inexpensive project. It will add synergies with the location being by PD and the MSB. But, you know, just like in our households, we have to make decisions as far as how we want to expend our dollars, or not expend them at all. So, Go ahead.
Two more little things. Number one, just for the public, none of these funds we're talking about are any ARPA funds, correct?
That is correct.
And then your statement, current and planned future revenue sources are sufficient to fund the capital needs of the utilities department. And that's what Kayleen said, and you said too, right? We have enough money to take care of all.
Again, that's the purpose of the annual rate studies, to see what we need to do going forward in order to maintain and support the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll discuss this further on Thursday as it is a public hearing. 5.1.
Approve a professional services agreement to the Superlative Group for asset valuation, naming rights, and sponsorship sales services for the Imagine Clearwater project.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Jim Hallius, Director of Parks and Recreation. As we've moved through the planning, design, and construction process of Imagine Clearwater, we've come to the realization that not only we're going to have an iconic public place, but we have an opportunity to offset some expenses by utilizing some revenue within the park. With that being said, staff went out through an RFP process to look to get contract with a professional company to enhance the types of revenues that we could look at within the park. So we sent out the RFP, and we've selected the Superlative Group out of Cleveland, Ohio. We'll get into the timeline regarding the Superlative Group in a second. I have their Senior Vice President of Strategy, Matthew Court here, and he'll talk to you about that. It's going to be a short timeline, but I wanted to kind of go into the progress or the process. It's a two-phase process, with the phase one being the naming rights and valuation process, and that's approximately $69,000 with a 15% contingency. And then we have an optional phase two side of the project, which is a sales component. So my intention, should council decide to do this, is we'll go forward with the phase one, and then once we realize what that phase one valuation is, then we'd come back for a discussion regarding phase two to find out council's level of comfort with that sales process. So I'd be happy to answer any questions initially, and then I'll turn it over to Matt Court of the Superlative Group to walk you through the process of the initial methodology and timeline.
Any initial questions for Mr. Hallius? Come on up.
Good morning. Again, my name is Matt Cordy. I'm the Vice President of Superlative Group, headquartered out of Cleveland. Thank you for your time this morning. I know a couple things we wanted to touch on. One was the initial timeline, expected timeline for our phase one valuation work. Typically, that process is around a 90-day window of time. Can be a little quicker or longer. Most of that is determined upon the initial research and evaluation and data collection that we do in conjunction with the team here with the city. A little bit from a process standpoint for that, once we jump into the valuation, it's a very collaborative process. So the first thing that we do is set on-site meetings and meetings with key stakeholders that are part of the process. So those from the Parks and Rec Department, operations, whoever might be involved in the planning, implementation, running of the facility. So we want to make sure we have a deep dive with everyone to fully understand the full breadth of the project. We put together a comprehensive info request form where we'll ask for any relevant data or metrics that have to do with the project that would be relevant to determining naming rights or other corporate partnership opportunities and their value. So we go through that, and then we do a lot of our own research, and that can cover anything from information from the DOT and possible traffic count visibility to demographics and other aspects of the city and what the property would look like. Our phase one valuation, this proprietary methodology, is really based on two different forms. One is a quantitative set of analysis, and the other is a qualitative set of analysis. And the reason why we go through this thorough approach is that on the back end, when you choose to take an opportunity to sales and you seek out corporate sponsors, no matter the organization you meet with, when you're asking them for a large sum of money over a long period of time, the first thing they're going to want to do is ask you, why is it worth what it's worth? And so this complete valuation analysis serves as that blueprint when you take these opportunities to market. So you're not just saying, well, we want X number of dollars for the naming rights of the amphitheater because we feel it's worth that. Here's all of the data that supports it. Part of our qualitative methodology we always benchmark. So what we will do is we will take all of the data sets, and it's an impressions-based model. So based on the total number of impressions through in-person, social media, traffic, whatever those inputs are, and we put that against a local market CPM, which is a cost per thousand. So I heard mentioned earlier from TV and radio, if an organization was looking to purchase a billboard in a given market, what are those media rates? And we put those impressions up against those media rates. We then benchmark that against similar properties, and that's done both locally, regionally, super regionally, and nationally. So part of this valuation is we'll compare the naming rights and other partnership opportunities in the venue to other like venues across the country to provide a solid benchmark. Again, so when this opportunity goes to market, you are understanding exactly why it is we're asking for what we're asking for. And so both the qualitative and qualitative analysis go into this comprehensive valuation report that also includes things like contract analysis. We want to understand what types of partnerships the city might already have that would lend themselves to new partnerships or prevent certain types of partnerships. So that contract analysis, policy analysis, and then culminating in that industry benchmarking. That report is then brought back to the staff, brought back to the city. We go through that draft report, all of the inputs to it, and then we will work to refine that through a final draft. So again, it's a collaborative process. We want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the data and the numbers and the outputs from it. Happy to speak towards any other relevant case studies in the state of Florida. We've got a pretty extensive client list. We've worked with Miami-Dade. We were the lead on the new FTX naming rights deal for the Heat Arena. We worked with the city of Doral. In the southeast, we've got extensive experience also, but there are many similar projects to this one that we've worked on across the country. City of Irvine and their great park in California, Houston First in Texas, which runs their convention and theater district and has a wonderful outdoor amphitheater as well. We've done work for Frisco and McKinney, suburbs of Dallas. We've done work for with similar venues to this. So wanted to get through that as quickly as possible and open up the floor for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Court? Councilmember Beckman.
Okay, so you mentioned, so this is part one where you're going to look at what we have in the Imagine Clearwater area and what might be of value and give us an inventory for things for naming rights.
Correct.
And part two phase, after, and that's $69,000. And then after that, we can contract with you to have you market it and get the best bang for our buck, you know?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So the way that the contract is structured is that once we deliver that report and everything is agreed upon, the city would have the option to retain us for sales in that, and we've put forward a couple of what those options would look like, and I'm happy to discuss what that process looks like as well.
Okay, and then the contract analysis, is that about, that's about the parameters of naming it? Like what kind of parameters we might want to set on who can put their name on different things?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to that. One would be any types of contracts or agreements that the city currently has that would affect who you may want to or be able to contract with for a naming rights of this property. So for example, sometimes we get into a project where someone is going to develop a new amphitheater, but the city has another corporate partnership already in place, perhaps with a healthcare institution or financial services firm. And if one of those organizations has category exclusivity throughout that city or county or municipality, then we want to understand right away, okay, this category of partners or prospective partners is off limits. So one of that aspect of that contract analysis is just understanding what's in place, if anything, before we go into that, because that's going to affect what the outputs would look like. The second part of that would then be, yes, we're always working with clients on sponsorship policy. Obviously, one of the big things is understanding what corporate partnerships is and is not, or what it should be within a given municipality, and that's different everywhere. What might be acceptable in Clearwater is going to be different than somewhere else, and we understand that. So we have a lot of benchmarks and a lot of internal documents that we'd be happy to work with when it comes to finalizing a sponsorship policy for the city. And as you can imagine, that could go forward in many different ways, from accepted categories or partnerships to things like signage restrictions and everything in between. So that's another aspect of working through what that valuation process would look like.
So do you need feedback on our feelings or the city's feelings about who we may contract with or for how long at this, at phase one?
You know, it's certainly helpful. one thing that, kind of skipping ahead, if we were working with you on the phase 2 for the sales component, that's not a process where we are going out and market on your behalf and we're just operating on an island. We aren't going to make any outreach before we provide a prospective list of partners, before that list is vetted. The last thing we want to do is spend time, or the time of an organization, getting them to the point of interest, agreement in principle, and then saying, well, that's not the type of organization we would partner with. So it's always good, and again, we try to tackle that up front with the stakeholder meetings to understand either certain organizations or categories that would either be key or preferred versus not of interest at all.
And who are some of the people that may be in a stakeholder meeting? Like what types of people do you invite to stakeholder meetings?
Sure, so early in that process, direct reports within the department, so Parks and Rec in this case, operations, obviously happy to take input from the council as well. Sometimes there's, food and beverage directors, concessions directors, program directors. I understand that, looking at something like this with hiring an outside operator to operate and program the amphitheater, if and when that came along as part of the process, it's good to bring those people into the fold, just to understand what type of programs they would be looking at hosting there, what type of frequency shows, things like that. So all of that would be an important part to put into the valuation. And so we really try to cast a wide net early on in that process to take in as many opinions as we can.
So would it be better if we had an operator in place before we contract with you?
It does not affect the valuation, and that's something that, honestly, a lot of times, a lot of our work is done, in some cases, even earlier in the process than where you are. Sometimes our work is put into a feasibility study to even consider building something.
Yeah.
So having an operator in place is certainly not what I would consider a critical piece of this whatsoever.
Thank you.
Councilmember Albritton.
So the contract is 60,000 with a 15%, which not to exceed 69,000. So could you give me an example of what the $9,000 would be spent for, the contingency part of it?
That I don't know, honestly, if that's more of an internal.
Looking at that, the contingency could be anywhere from travel, if there's extra travel that need to take place to have certain members of the team come down here. The 60,000 is kind of a base template on how they'll go forward and do the evaluation study. Now, there could be types for another visit, and they have their times kind of mapped out. Again, that's how they come to the price, is the paid for time of what they're going to do. So it just would depend on how extensive we'd want to get with them on certain things. And again, going back to policy development, things of that nature, if we wanted to go above and beyond the certain criteria that were supplied to us in the initial proposal, then that's where that extra 15% would come.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bunker? Do you have anything?
No, I didn't have anything.
Mr. Jennings?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In response to Councilmember Beckman's question about the management contract, so I did want to let the council know, and certainly the public know, that on this past Friday, we issued a request for qualifications, or an RFQ, for that management agreement. We have a 30-day turnaround, and so, frankly, I think we potentially could have a management team in place that would also help inform this process. So I just wanted to update you on that.
Thank you.
I mean, this is a large opportunity. I have enough experience in this to be dangerous, having been on a project. So, I mean, your resume is wonderful. I'm really happy with that. Let me ask you, though, a couple questions, because you're looking at other venues that are similar, and then I understand the stats that you're looking at to get to valuations. What if this exceeds our expectations significantly? Is there a chance that we leave money on the table?
So that's a great question. When we provide values for things like naming rights, we always do so with a floor to ceiling range. And we understand that throughout the data collection that we do and the research that we do, there's always the chance of certain venues underperforming or overperforming. And so we try to account for that up front in the initial part of the research and the development of the report. The other thing that I would recommend is that when we put forward these values, as an exacta science as we'd like to think it would be, at the end of the day, we would take these opportunities to market operating on your behalf, and the market is going to speak for itself. And so as we get out in the market with this opportunity, we always are going to represent things in a bullish way. And a lot of that then goes to the long-term structure of the contract, of that naming rights agreement, and putting in certain caveats. As you can imagine, over the past couple of years with COVID, we've had to get very creative with how we've structured agreements in this time. We've been able to bring forward multiple long-term naming rights agreements, even during kind of the unease of the past 2 years. And so a lot of that, the document and the valuation serves as the benchmark and the blueprint to take these to market so that we can show an organization why something is worth what it's worth. It's more important on the back end, on the sales campaign side, to make sure that we're structuring a contract the right way so that if a venue is overperforming, there's opportunities to leverage that for growth in that partnership.
So I appreciate the fact that you're saying the market will determine pricing, because it's only what somebody is willing to pay. But tell me a little bit about then corporate sponsorship and naming versus individuals.
Yeah. Corporate sponsorship and naming is going to, for more times than not, our valuations end up being very, very good when it comes to the dollar amount that we end up bringing forward. And the reason being is that anytime you go to a corporation, whether it's a healthcare institution, an insurance company, financial, auto, whoever it may be, and you're going to ask them for X number of millions of dollars over 10 or 20 years, the first thing they're going to want to do is try to poke holes in why that is what it is. And most of the time they're going to have an outside firm like ours representing them, and they're going to ask for all of this data that we've put forward. And so most of the time, the corporate entities, we will end up very, very close to what we've put forward. And that's also in determining the right partner for a given municipality as well. When it comes to individuals, there's a little bit more of, or there can be more of a variance in that, strictly based on one's affinity for a particular project or city or something like that. And so while we always want to use that data for the benchmark, you know, a perfect example, we just did an agreement up in Ohio actually with Kent State and doing naming rights for a new business school and things like that. We ended up taking that to market and found an individual who wanted to support that. And we still went off of the valuation, and we ended up basically spot on to where we were. So I would say there can be more variance in an individual, again, just because there's a little more emotion that comes into it, where most of the time corporation, while there can be emotions that come into something like a decision on naming rights, a lot of times they're going to look at it from an ROI perspective. And what are we putting into this? What are we getting out of it? What does the partnership mean to us? But again, I would say that our model and methodology has stood up on itself for about 30 years in terms of being pretty spot on for the valuations.
But when you talk about corporate versus an individual, like this person that is naming a business school, some of those are in perpetuity or until the structure is demolished and replaced, whereas the corporate has an actual term that's finite.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And you know, quite frankly, we have not, when we are leading a sales effort, we do not end up in many situations where we're talking about deals in perpetuity. Mostly because you're going to build this beautiful facility, and then in 10, 15, 20 years, something's going to need cosmetic repair or a new roof or a new plumbing or whatever it would be. And so why we a lot of times advise against deals in perpetuity is because the naming rights of a particular venue, aside from ongoing ticket sales, is the largest annuity. And that's what we're really talking about here, is creating an annuity revenue stream for you through corporate partnership. And so if you grant the naming rights to an individual or a business in perpetuity, you've capped the revenue for that forever. Whereas if we did a 20-year deal, then when you need to renovate the project again in 15 or 20 years, there's another opportunity to either renew or extend the current corporate partner or take that opportunity back out to market so that you can keep that revenue stream going. So I would say yes, individuals look for perpetuity more than corporations do.
Sure.
But that's something that we usually advise against and stay away from.
So that legacy you advise against?
Yeah, it just depends on the scope of the project. I mean, sometimes there are smaller things or more meaningful things, but I would say in an example of this particular project, it would be our advice to stay away from a perpetual naming rights agreement.
How granular are you going to get on naming different components within the park? And how do you balance bringing revenue in that helps supplement our initial cost or ongoing operations and maintenance with slapping a name on everything?
Yep, great question. So in the valuation process, very granular. And that's the purpose of it, to be able to come forward and say, here's the naming rights of an amphitheater versus a playground versus a given area in there. And the reason we do that is so that when we get to sales, there's always a delicate balance, and I would say 80 to 85% of our work is in representing municipal entities. And so there's always a caution against the over-corporatization of public space. It's not a private arena or anything like that. We do not take, as much as I enjoy it, we don't take a NASCAR approach to our work. We subscribe to a bit of more of a less is more approach. So at the end of the day, the report is meant to show you all of the possibilities and real-world values of naming rights of different assets, category partnerships, programmatic sponsorships like a weekend series or a summer series or something like that, so you can understand exactly what all of those things are worth and what the opportunities are. Now, if we were representing you taking these things to market, we always want to start with the very top high-end piece and leverage the market against the most impactful, largest opportunities. We always try to bring those to fruition first, but at the end of the day, it would fall back on the department and the city as to what type of partnerships you would want to bring forward. The last thing you want to do in pouring money into a venue like this then is degrade the aesthetics by having 27 different corporate partnerships in there. So realistically, if we were working on this project from a sales perspective, I wouldn't sit here and say we're going to bring 30 different sponsors forward. The goal would be to bring several high-end, top-flight partners so that it also provides them better ROI. The last thing a corporate partner wants to be is one of 40. They want to be one of 5. And so that's our philosophy, and most of the time that pairs with the philosophy of our in particular, municipal clients.
But if you go to like our Ruth Eckerd Hall, there are nameplates on the back of every single seat.
Sure.
It's a way that the community could be involved and also honor somebody.
Mm-hmm.
My last question goes to our city attorney. In looking at the contract and the next step, do you have heartburn about anything? Because we have a very specialized charter. And have you thought about the context of that with this process? And is there anything we need to know on the front end?
Nothing major. Mr. Kohler and I have talked about this contract relatively extensively. At this point, council is only being asked to approve that phase 1, so there is no commitment to move forward with phase 2. Initially, I don't have any concerns about phase 2 that Mr. Kohler and I have discussed, but it's important to emphasize the council is only being asked to approve phase 1 at this point.
If we're not doing phase 2, we shouldn't do phase 1 though.
Certainly, I'm sure the council will move forward with naming. Whether Superlative is the best partner for that is a question for council. Obviously, they're here hoping to make their pitch as part of phase 1, that in fact, they're the best partner for phase 2. But from what I've discussed right now with Mr. Kohler, I don't have any concerns over how that's being structured relative to our charter.
You understand what I'm saying though? There's no reason to put values on different things if we don't have the willingness to do some naming of these different properties, right? Why do a phase 1 if there isn't a phase 2, regardless of who does it?
No, of course, but the council is not locked into working with Superlative on phase 2. That was the big issue the legal team would discuss to make sure that once council approves the phase one, that you're not forced into phase two, depending on what work product we get out of them in phase one, and that was something that was important. But on the charter side of it, I don't have any concerns right now with how it's being structured. As part of phase one, if council approves this item, the city attorney's office will stay involved, working with Superlative to talk about some of our charter issues, kind of like they were talking about issues where different cities have, different corporate partners or different institutional partners and things like that. Our city charter has some unique provisions relative to land use and things like that. Those are things that we can talk about throughout phase one, so definitely aware of the issue.
Mr. Jennings?
Thank you, Mayor. I did have just a general question on the current valuation of pouring rights for a venue of this size. I'm curious, I negotiated pouring rights agreements, 12, 15 years ago. I'm curious because really what we've been talking about is naming rights, but pouring rights is a very different thing. I mean, this gives exclusivity. And so I was wondering if you could just brief us on kind of the current valuation of that type of an agreement.
Yeah, so pouring rights is an aspect of what would be included as part of this overall valuation. Pouring rights is something that as a firm we're very familiar with, and we've done over 160 of them to date.
Do you want to explain it for everybody?
Sure.
at home?
So pouring rights, and this speaks specifically to non-alcoholic beverages. And realistically in this category, you have two main players in the space, red and blue, Pepsi and Coke. Even though Keurig Dr. Pepper sometimes does get involved with it. But most of the time, these are category exclusive opportunities. You're only going to have one of those beverage companies as a part of the venue. And most of the time, these are agreements in about 10 years in length is a standard term for a pouring rights agreement. That term usually allows for the best ROI for our client and the willingness of a Pepsi or Coca-Cola to come forward with a really nice proposal for those pouring rights. And most of the time, that is inclusive of carbonated beverages, water, it can be juices, mixers, really, again, anything that would fall kind of under that non-alcoholic beverage. And so most of the time with a venue like this, you've got to go off of one of two things. One, if you have historical data to support it, which in this case you really wouldn't, or projections for future attendance. And so it can be, again, a very nice annuity to create for the city, a nice revenue stream. It's also a good way to fold in a corporate partner that's got some really excellent bandwidth to help improve the overall operations. Most of the time, when you're operating a venue, things like anything as granular as ice machines to fountain machines to the soda guns or anything in between are usually outgoing expenses for the venue operator. And these are things that we would usually wrap into a pouring rights agreement to have that beverage company provide for. So not only are you getting revenue in, but you're having some cost savings as part of that as well. So it's a really great opportunity to seize new revenue. It's a great opportunity to build a corporate partnership with a larger entity. And most of the time, there's other things at stake that they're looking to improve in. Now, Coke and Pepsi, a lot of them have different interests in terms of culture and arts, so there'll be overlaps with a project like this to where, whether it's pouring rights or naming rights, aside from the dollars and cents ROI that you would be looking for, there's always an ROI in how do we elevate the venue, how do we elevate the customer experience and those types of things. So Coke, Pepsi, or a company like that can bring other opportunities to the table in terms of what that pouring rights deal might mean. But those are, I don't want to call it a low-hanging fruit necessarily, but those are the types of partnerships that are usually pretty swift to come to fruition with a facility like this.
Councilmember Beckman.
I have a question. So it was wonderful to learn about pouring rights. Haven't heard that phrase before.
Sure.
Good.
So I have a question. So I looked at, and you did naming, you've operated throughout the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever worked with municipalities that have environmental policies that restrict what types of products are used on city property, as in we're not going to have single-use plastic, or we're going to have only recyclable items? And how does that affect Coke, Pepsi, and any other person that contracts on that property?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the environmental or green piece of this has become a really driving factor, as you can imagine, for a lot of our municipal clients. And when it relates to things like pouring rights, that's something that Coke and Pepsi have now been very forward about. As an example, we did a pouring rights deal on the other side of the state down in Miami Beach, and there all of the recycling elements were then handled as a part of that contract and put forward. We have another agreement with the Symphony Orchestra in California, and that's where most of the recyclable elements, they're going away from, like aluminum can distribution. So if not glass, they're providing recyclable cups and things like that. So those are all elements that can intertwine themselves into your final agreement. And I would say that where several years ago some of those things became a little more restrictive or a hindrance in terms of bringing corporate partnerships forward, now those have kind of flipped and done a 180 and now actually become an area where a lot of corporate partners look to dive in. And so whether it's something like pouring rights or another category opportunity, those types of green initiatives are something that can really become a central piece. And again, beyond just the dollars and cents ROI that you could get in a deal, but other ways to elevate the venue or your mission or certain goals that you would have.
Great. And then if we signed a contract, if the state has some preemption from allowing us to do things like that or whatever we're dealing with, if we sign a contract for pouring rights for 10 years and the law changes at the state level and we want to come and change things, you could have it written in the contract that, if the city moves forward with these types of green initiatives, they can be flexible in that area or something like that?
Sure. I mean, again, most of that's doing the due diligence in the first part in the valuation process, where, again, back to the contract analysis, understanding what's on the books now, what's codified law and regulation now, and then also not trying to predict. A lot of things can change in 10 years, obviously. So making sure that the contract language is flexible enough to allow for those types of adjustments. So again, from our perspective, if we were working on it from a sales campaign, we have our own in-house attorneys who work on these types of things, and then we always work in cooperation with the city attorney in sculpting an agreement that makes sense for both parties.
Great, thank you.
Consent?
Yes.
All right. 6.1, Chief, you're gonna get in under the wire, my friend.
I was getting nervous.
Approve amendment to letter of agreement and contract with University of North Florida Training and Services Institute for a pedestrian and bicycle safety grant award.
Good morning, Dan Slaughter, Police Chief. Back in August 19th of 2021, we started our next phase of the Florida Department of Transportation's high visibility and enforcement program dealing with pedestrian and bicycle safety. This is a grant that's coordinated through the University of North Florida Training Institute and the Institute of Police Technology and Management. What has happened and reoccurs every time we do this grant is additional funds become available midstream within the grant, and they are offering an additional $25,000. The initial approval was for $21,455.01, and we're seeking to accept another $25,000, giving us a total of $46,455.01. And we will use that to do details on overtime to address pedestrian bicycle safety. We're more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the chief? Consent?
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a 7-minute recess. We'll be back at 1 minute of 11. Chief. Good morning. We'll reconvene the work session. We are on item 7.1.
Approve the request from the owner of property address 2427 Timber Crest Circle East, Clearwater, to vacate a portion of the 10-foot wide platted drainage and utility easement and a portion of the 5-foot wide platted utility easement located on lot 156 Woodgate of Countryside, Unit 1.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. Suzanne Kramer, Real Estate Services Coordinator. The purpose of this vacation is to allow for space for concrete patio pavers for a pool deck, as well as pool equipment inside the easements. The city there has no utilities present in the easement, and city staff have reviewed and have no objection. Any questions?
Any questions? All right. We will hear that again on Thursday. Thank you. Sorry for a 2-hour delay. 8.1.
Authorize a purchase order to Odyssey Manufacturing Company of Tampa, Florida for the continuous supply of sodium hydroxide and sodium bisulfite aqueous solution.
Good morning. I'm Mike Flanning, Assistant Director of Public Utilities. The item before you today is for the award of a contract for chemicals used to meet regulatory requirements at the water and wastewater facilities. There were 5 respondents to this request for bids. We are recommending awarding Odyssey Manufacturing the amount not to exceed $400,000. This will be a 1-year contract through March 20th, 2023 with the option of 2 1-year renewals. At this time, are there any questions?
Any questions? All right, consent?
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
9.1.
Reappoint Gregory Bird as a citizen representative and Brianne Roberts as the Clearwater Arts Alliance, Inc. representative to the Public Art and Design Board with terms to expire March 31st, 2026. Council members, both of these individuals were appointed last year to fill an unexpired term and are interested in being reappointed.
Any questions? Consent?
Yep.
Yes.
10.1. Any questions on second readings? 10.1 through 10.3. All right. Mr. Jennings, anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to once again thank our engineering department. They have been doing a fantastic job of getting out and repairing the sidewalks. We have the identified 200 plus sidewalks. We have been able to fix over 50% of those already, with the rest of that category of sidewalks here will be completed shortly. We also have some tree impacted sidewalks, and that's going to take a little bit longer, but we're very focused on that as well. Just as an aside, I wanted to thank Scott Burrows, who has worked in the city manager's office for the last 12 years. Scott went and got his MPA, Masters of Public Administration. Over the last couple of years, he has now transitioned to our finance department. And Patty DeMillo has joined the city manager's office as the assistant to the 3 of us. So I want to wish Scott all the best, and I'm so happy that we were able to keep him within the family.
Scott is a rock star, and congratulations to finance, Mr. Ravens. I look forward to seeing what he's going to do. He did a magnificent job when he was handling the 5 of us and also the city manager's office. It was quite a juggling act, so congratulations to him. Mr. Margolis, anything?
Just wanted to say I agree with Scott Burrows. Congratulations to him. I think he is an incredible asset to the city, and Mr. Ravens, looking forward to seeing what he does in finance as well.
All right. Any council items for the future? Councilmember Beckman.
Yeah, I was hoping we could talk about a tenant's bill of rights for Clearwater. St. Pete has addressed it. Tampa is looking at it. They have a second reading of it, like March 5th or something. And it's just, as I understand it, it's a form that we would require landlords to give to tenants that informs them of all of their rights. And I think it would be a nice gesture in this, time when evictions are increasing, rents increasing, and then people are not able to maintain their leases. I think it's important that we can arm our residents with all the facts they need to know as they secure rental property here. So I have copies of the Tampa one and the St. Pete one I could share if we put it on a future agenda.
Yeah, we can agenda it. I'd like to hear from the city attorney once he has a chance to digest it, what the ramifications are, the teeth, and what the additional costs, if any, there are with actually instituting that, but that's for a future meeting. Anything else? All right, we're adjourned to Thursday. Thank you all.